While Karen was building her empire, I was quietly building the case that would put her behind bars, one gazebo at a time. For 6 months, I watched as she turned my grandfather's sacred fishing lake into a luxury resort playground, charging strangers $500 a night to sip champagne in a place where my family had mourned, celebrated, and found solace for 60 years. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, fake permit specialist, and professional land thief, thought she had found an easy target in some weekend electrician who didn't understand modern community development. What she didn't realize was that every illegal dock she erected, every fraudulent guest she hosted, and every dollar she pocketed was adding another federal felony to the growing list, with my name on the witness list. While Karen was busy playing resort mogul on land that wasn't hers, I was learning firsthand that the FBI takes interstate commerce fraud very seriously. Where are you watching this from, by the way? Drop a comment below, because you're about to see the most satisfying federal takedown of a suburban tyrant I've ever orchestrated. Let me paint the picture of how this whole nightmare began. My name is Mike, and I inherited this beautiful 200-acre property from my grandfather 3 years ago. Grandpa Joe, a World War II veteran, had returned home in 1945 and decided he'd had enough of crowds and noise. He bought this land for next to nothing in the 1960s and spent the next 40 years building a modest cabin with his own 2 hands. Every nail, every board, every stone in that fireplace carries his effort and care. The crown jewel of the property was the pristine 40-acre lake. Crystal clear water fed by natural springs, surrounded by old-growth oak trees Grandpa refused to cut down. "Mike," he would tell me as we fished off that weathered dock, "this place isn't just property, it's peace of mind." Even now, the metallic tang of his old tackle box and the lingering scent of Old Spice from his cabin dresser bring those memories rushing back. Now, here's where things get complicated. Over the years, suburban sprawl crept closer to Grandpa's sanctuary. By 2018, cookie-cutter houses surrounded us on 3 sides, and the new residents formed an HOA called the Sunset Hills Community Association. I work as an electrician, good, honest work that pays the bills, and I drive out to the lake every weekend to escape the chaos, just like Grandpa taught me. Enter our villain, Karen Whitmore, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator. Picture a woman who drives a spotless white Lexus SUV, married to a city councilman, and genuinely believes she runs the entire zip code. This is someone who measures grass height with an actual ruler and sends violation notices for unapproved mailbox colors. Full-blown suburban tyrant, no exaggeration. Karen had tried multiple times to force me to join their HOA despite my property being completely outside their boundaries. "It's about community standards," she'd say, her tennis shoes squeaking against the dock planks whenever she showed up uninvited. "Your property affects our values." The harassment started small. Karen organized volunteer cleanup days, bringing groups of neighbors onto my land without permission, claiming the lake was a community resource. When I confronted her about trespassing, she had the audacity to mention adverse possession and the greater good. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I posted no trespassing signs around the entire property, clear, legal, unambiguous. Guess what happened next? Karen had them removed overnight. Not torn down, not vandalized, professionally removed, like she owned the place. I sent her a certified legal letter, explaining she was trespassing and needed to stop immediately. Her response? A bogus cease and desist letter claiming I was harassing her and interfering with community activities. Then the harassment escalated. Diesel exhaust from mysterious construction equipment started appearing at odd hours, accompanied by a campaign of petty intimidation that would make a middle school bully jealous, noise complaints to the city about my fishing boat, false reports to the utility company about unsafe electrical work in my cabin, and parking violation tickets on my own property because, apparently, my truck was abandoned if it sat in the same spot for more than 3 days. But Karen Whitmore had no idea who she was messing with. Grandpa Joe didn't just teach me about fishing and honest work. He taught me how to stand up to bullies. He also taught me something that would prove invaluable. Always know exactly what you own, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. The crunch of imported gravel under designer shoes was about to become the sound of Karen's world collapsing. She thought she was dealing with a weekend warrior who would roll over at the first sign of official paperwork. What she didn't realize was that this weekend warrior had 40 years of Grandpa's wisdom backing him up, and absolutely nothing left to lose. 2 weeks after my legal letter, I drove out for what I thought would be a peaceful Saturday morning of fishing. Instead, I found a full construction crew building a massive dock extension onto my lake, not just expanding the existing dock, but constructing an entirely new commercial-grade structure with composite decking and stainless steel railings. I parked my truck and walked down, still trying to process what I was seeing. The foreman, a decent guy named Tony, looked just as confused as I felt when I introduced myself as the property owner. "Told us this was a community recreation facility," Tony said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Said she had all the permits." He handed me a stack of official-looking paperwork with a header Lakeshore Community Association. That's when the first minute twist hit me like a brick. Karen hadn't just overstepped her authority, she'd created an entirely fake HOA entity. Same initials as the real Sunset Hills Community Association, SHCA. But this new Lakeshore Community Association, LCA, existed solely on paper. According to these forged documents, the LCA had filed a claim of ownership for abandoned waterfront property. The smell of fresh-cut lumber mixed with the roar of power tools across water that had been calm for 60 years. My grandfather's peaceful sanctuary was being turned into a corporate boardwalk. "Tony," I said, pulling out my phone to show him my property deed. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're building on stolen land." The poor guy's face went white. It turned out some bureaucrat at city planning had rubber-stamped Karen's permits without ever conducting a site inspection. Why would they? The paperwork looked legitimate, complete with surveyor signatures and environmental impact assessments. But here's where Karen's arrogance worked against her. While Tony was explaining how his crew had been hired by the mysterious Lakeshore Community Association, guess who showed up in her white Lexus? "Excuse me," Karen said, stepping out in designer jeans and spotless hiking boots that had clearly never seen a trail, "but you're interfering with a permitted construction project." "This is my land, Karen. You're trespassing, and you're building without my permission," I said, holding up my deed. Her response: "I'll be filing a lawsuit for project delays and contractor interference." Then she turned to Tony. "I kid you not. Is there a manager I can speak to about this disruption?" Tony looked at me, then at her, and started laughing. "Lady, he is the manager. This is his property." That's when I made my counterpunch. I immediately called the construction company's main office and faxed over my property documents. Construction stopped within the hour. But Karen wasn't done. She threatened to sue me for malicious interference with legitimate business operations. So, I did what Grandpa would have done. I got ahead of the problem. I filed a formal complaint with the City Planning Department, demanding an investigation into how these fraudulent permits got approved. Then I installed professional security cameras around the entire property perimeter. If Karen wanted to play games, I would document every single move. But the real kicker came when I started researching this Lakeshore Community Association. It turns out you can create a business entity in our state for less than $100 using a simple online form. Karen had filed articles of incorporation 3 months earlier, listing herself as president and my property address as the primary community asset. Here's your first knowledge nugget. Advice possession laws require someone to openly occupy your land for a specific period, usually 10 to 20 years, depending on the state, before they can claim ownership. Someone can't just show up, file fake paperwork, and steal your property overnight. Takeaway: always check public records when neighbors start claiming authority over your land. The construction crew packed up their equipment, but Karen's white Lexus sat in my driveway for another hour while she made furious phone calls. Through my new security cameras, I watched her gesturing wildly, probably trying to figure out how her perfect plan had unraveled so quickly. What she didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. Karen had shown me exactly how far she was willing to go. Now I knew I wasn't dealing with garden-variety HOA overreach. This was organized fraud, complete with forged documents and fake business entities. As Tony's crew loaded their equipment onto trailers, Tony walked over and handed me his business card. "Look, Mike, I'm sorry about this mess. If you ever need any legitimate work done, give me a call. And maybe next time someone hires us for community property, we'll ask to see actual proof of ownership." The taste of cold coffee sat bitter in my mouth as I watched Karen's Lexus finally disappear down the gravel road. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. I should have known that stopping Karen's construction project would only make her more determined. 2 weeks later, I pulled into my driveway to find landscaping crews installing a massive gazebo where the old fishing pier used to be. Not just any gazebo. We're talking about a professional-grade structure with built-in lighting, a stone fire pit, and what looked like a commercial kitchen prep area. But the real kicker was the signage. Professional metal signs posted around the property: Sunset Shores Resort, Velasco Inn, exclusive lakefront retreat experience, complete with a phone number and website URL. I walked up to the landscaping foreman, a guy who clearly would rather be anywhere else. "Excuse me, who hired you for this job?" "Lakeshore Community Association," he said, avoiding eye contact. Lady in the white SUV said this was a rush job for the grand opening next month. Grand opening? I pulled out my phone and typed in the website address. Sure enough, there was a fully functional resort booking site, complete with professional photos of my property and a rate sheet that made my jaw drop. $500 per night for glamping packages, $700 for premium lakefront suites, $1,000 for exclusive weekend retreats. Here's the minute twist that made my blood boil. Karen wasn't just using my property, she was exploiting my family's story. The website featured a section called Our Heritage, with photos she'd stolen from my social media accounts, pictures of Grandpa Joe in his army uniform, stories about him building the cabin with his own hands, even a photo of his Purple Heart medal that I'd posted on Veterans Day. She was literally selling my grandfather's military service as part of her fake resort experience. The smell of fresh mulch and expensive landscaping filled the air as crews installed what looked like a professional irrigation system. These weren't weekend warriors. This was a full-scale commercial operation being built on my property without my knowledge or consent. I immediately called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah who specialized in property theft cases. "Mike," she said after I explained the situation, "this isn't just trespassing anymore. This is organized fraud with criminal implications." Sarah explained that Karen had crossed several legal lines. First, theft of intellectual property by using my family photos without permission. Second, operating a commercial business without proper licenses or permits. Third, consumer fraud by taking money from customers for services she couldn't legally provide. My counterattack was swift and multi-pronged. First, I contacted every person who had made reservations through the fake website. "Hi, this is Mike, the actual owner of the property you booked. I'm calling to let you know that Sunset Shores Resort is operating without permission, and you should cancel your reservation immediately." Most people were understanding once I explained the situation. A few were angry, but not at me, at Karen for scamming them. One couple had already paid a $500 deposit for their anniversary weekend. Second, I filed a criminal complaint for theft of intellectual property, specifically my grandfather's military photos and service history. Using a veteran's photos and medals for commercial purposes without permission is a federal crime in some circumstances. But here's where things got complicated. When I contacted the local police, the desk sergeant seemed oddly dismissive. "Sounds like a civil matter to me," he said, barely looking at my evidence. Turns out Police Chief Bradley plays golf every Thursday with Karen's husband, City Councilman Robert Whitmore. Sarah warned me that civil litigation could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. The good news, she said, was that Karen was getting overconfident. Every day she operated this fake resort, she was creating more evidence against herself. That evening, I sat on what was left of my grandfather's original dock, watching crews install industrial-grade lighting around the property. The sound of generators hummed where loons used to call. The texture of legal documents felt crisp and intimidating in my hands as I reviewed Sarah's strategy recommendations. Then Karen made her biggest mistake yet. She started a whisper campaign around the neighborhood, telling people I was unstable and making threats. Several neighbors mentioned that Karen had warned them to stay away from me because I was dangerous and possibly armed. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Defamation laws protect you when someone spreads false statements that damage your reputation. In most states, calling someone dangerous or unstable without evidence constitutes slander, especially if it affects your business or personal relationships. Takeaway: document every false statement. Defamation cases are easier to win when you have proof of the lie. As I watched the last landscaping truck pull away, leaving behind a property I barely recognized, I realized Karen had just handed me the perfect weapon. She wasn't just stealing my land anymore, she was destroying my reputation to cover her tracks. Time to show her what a real threat looked like. 3 weeks after the landscaping fiasco, I drove up to find something that made my grandfather's worst nightmares look like pleasant dreams. Actual resort guests had arrived. I'm talking Range Rovers and Tesla SUVs parked in my driveway, complete strangers lounging on my dock with catered meals served on white tablecloths. A professional photographer was taking promotional shots while Karen gave guided tours to well-dressed couples carrying champagne glasses. I could hear her voice carrying across the water. And this is where our founder's grandfather built his original homestead, creating the authentic heritage experience that makes Sunset Shores so special. I parked my truck and walked down to the dock where a server in a crisp white uniform was arranging artisanal cheese plates. The guests looked at me like I was some kind of groundskeeper who'd wandered into their exclusive party. "Excuse me," said a woman in designer yoga pants, "but this is a private event." "You're absolutely right," I replied, pulling out my property deed. "And this is my private property." The mini twist that nearly made me lose my cool came when I overheard Karen explaining the pricing structure to a potential booking. She was charging premium rates for what she called the authentic family history experience, an extra $22,000 per night for guests who wanted to hear the founder's grandfather's war stories, and $150 for exclusive fishing rights in the family's private lake. She was literally selling my grandfather's military service and charging extra for the privilege of fishing in water that belonged to me. But what really got my attention was when one of the guests mentioned they'd paid $3,000 for a weekend corporate retreat package. Karen was bragging about how the profits were funding her husband's upcoming mayoral campaign. She wasn't just stealing my property, she was using it to buy political power. My counterpunch was direct but calculated. I walked up to the group of guests and introduced myself politely. "Hi folks, I'm Mike, the actual owner of this property. I hate to interrupt your meal, but I wanted to let you know that you're currently trespassing on private land." I showed them my property deed, tax records, and a photo of my grandfather in his army uniform, the same photo Karen had stolen for her website. "This woman," I said, pointing to Karen, "is operating an illegal business on my family's land without permission." The guests' reactions ranged from confused to embarrassed to downright angry. One couple had driven 6 hours for their anniversary weekend. Another had booked the corporate retreat months in advance. But most of them were decent people who didn't want to be part of a scam. "If you'd like to stay and enjoy the property legitimately," I offered, "I'd be happy to work out reasonable rates. But you should know that this resort has no business license, no insurance, and no legal right to operate here." That's when Karen made her next desperate move. She called the police, claiming I was harassing paying customers and interfering with legitimate business operations. When Officer Martinez arrived, thankfully not one of Chief Bradley's golf buddies, Karen tried to have me arrested for trespassing on my own property. Officer Martinez took one look at my deed and Karen's fake paperwork, then politely asked the guests to pack up their belongings. He told Karen, "You can't operate a commercial business on someone else's property without their permission." But Karen wasn't finished. Within 48 hours, she'd filed for a restraining order, claiming I was threatening resort guests and destroying her livelihood. The request was denied, but it created weeks of legal hassle and court appearances. Here's where things got really interesting. Karen hired a private security guard to protect guests from the hostile landowner. The poor kid was maybe 20 years old, wearing a uniform from Rent-A-Cop Security, and clearly had no idea what he'd gotten himself into. "Hey, man," he said when I showed up for my usual weekend visit. "I'm really sorry about this. My supervisor just told me to keep people separated." Then he asked if I knew any good fishing spots because he was thinking about bringing his kids out sometime. Meanwhile, the local news picked up the story as a property dispute disrupting new business. Karen played the victim perfectly, painting herself as a female entrepreneur being bullied by an angry male landowner who couldn't accept progress. But every interview she gave created more evidence against her. Every lie about property ownership, every false claim about permits and licensing, every fabricated story about my grandfather's history, I recorded it all. The sound of industrial lawnmowers at 7 a.m. became my daily wake-up call, followed by the chatter of tourists who thought they were staying at a legitimate resort. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with expensive sunscreen created a toxic cocktail that would have made Grandpa Joe sick. But Karen's hubris was about to become her downfall. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source: Karen's own neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly accountant who'd been suspicious about the HOA finances for months. She knocked on my door one evening with a manila folder and a worried expression. "Mike," she said, "I think you need to see this." Inside that folder was a financial bombshell that changed everything. While researching property records for my lawyer, Mrs. Chen had stumbled across Karen's real estate business documents. Whitmore Properties wasn't just struggling, it was completely bankrupt. Karen owed $200,000 in back taxes, had defaulted on 3 commercial loans, and was facing foreclosure on her office building within 60 days. But here's the kicker that made my jaw drop. Karen and her husband didn't even own property in the Sunset Hills neighborhood. They were renters, had been for 2 years ever since they lost their house to bankruptcy. She'd been running the HOA president scam to collect fees from neighbors, Mrs. Chen explained, showing me forged deposit slips, $50 a month from 4 to 7 families, all going into her personal account instead of community maintenance. The resort income wasn't just Karen's side hustle. It was her only way to avoid complete financial ruin. Every guest payment, every corporate retreat booking, every dollar she squeezed from my property was going straight to creditors and lawyers. Sarah, my lawyer, nearly dropped her coffee when I showed her the evidence. "Mike, this changes the entire game. Karen isn't just trespassing. She's desperate. And desperate people make careless mistakes." That's when Sarah discovered the legal loophole that would become Karen's undoing. There's an obscure state law about recreational land use that most people don't know about. Anyone operating a commercial business on private land without permission faces triple damages, not just what they earned, but 3 times that amount in penalties. Here's your third knowledge nugget. Triple damages laws exist in most states to punish deliberate theft of property use. If someone knowingly operates a business on your land without permission, you can often recover 3 times their profits plus attorney fees. Takeaway: research your state's trespass and business interference laws. The penalties are often much higher than you think. The real game changer came when Sarah contacted the state attorney general's office. Turns out they'd been investigating a string of similar resort scams across 3 counties. Karen's operation fit the exact pattern: fake business entities, stolen property use, fraudulent marketing materials, and unlicensed commercial operations. "We've been building a case against this type of fraud for 6 months, the investigator told Sarah. "Your client's documentation could be the missing piece we need." Suddenly, I wasn't just defending my property. I was helping expose a criminal enterprise that had been victimizing property owners across the region. Karen's desperation had made her sloppy, and her sloppiness was about to destroy her. The emotional shift hit me like a lightning bolt. For months, I'd been playing defense, reacting to Karen's attacks, feeling like a victim in my own story. But now, I had something I hadn't felt since this nightmare started: the power to go on offense. I sat in Grandpa Joe's old cabin that night, surrounded by his military medals and faded photographs, remembering something he used to say: "Mike, when you're fighting a war, the most important thing isn't how strong you are. It's knowing your enemy's weakness before they know yours." Karen's weakness was her desperation. She needed my property to survive financially, which meant she'd keep escalating, keep taking bigger risks, keep creating more evidence against herself. All I had to do was let her dig the hole deeper while I built an airtight case. The taste of vengeance was sweeter than I'd expected. But Grandpa had taught me something else. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the bully can't hurt anyone else. Karen had no idea that her financial house of cards was about to collapse, but I did. And I was going to make sure the whole neighborhood got front row seats to the show. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled what Sarah called the dream team of property justice. First up was Sarah herself, a property lawyer who specialized in fraud cases and had a personal vendetta against HOA corruption after her own parents got scammed in Florida. Next, we brought in Marcus Williams, a tax attorney recommended by the State Bar Association who knew every loophole in commercial property law. He had helped recover millions in stolen assets from fraudulent business operations and was fascinated by Karen's triple MBB scam. Then there was Detective Rita Gonzalez, not officially on the team but a private investigator with government connections who owed Sarah a favor. Rita specialized in financial fraud and had been tracking similar resort scams for insurance companies. Finally, we added Linda Park, a forensic accountant who could trace money through offshore accounts and shell companies. If Karen had hidden assets, Linda would find them. But the most surprising ally was Mrs. Chen, who turned out to be a retired IRS auditor with 40 years of experience catching tax cheats. "Mike," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she spread financial documents across my kitchen table, "this woman has been committing fraud so long, I doubt she remembers what legal income looks like. Here's the strategy we developed, phase by phase. Phase 1, documentation blitz. Every guest visit, every payment transaction, every false claim Karen made needed to be recorded and categorized. Rita set up surveillance equipment capable of capturing license plates, faces, and conversations from 300 yards away. We built a database of every person defrauded, every dollar stolen, and every lie told. Phase 2, agency coordination. Marcus filed complaints with the State Tax Authority, the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and the State Tourism Board about unlicensed commercial operations. Linda submitted detailed financial analyses to the IRS showing unreported business income and tax evasion. Sarah coordinated with a state investigator to ensure our evidence fit their larger case. Phase 3, asset protection. Here's a legal maneuver most people don't know about. We filed a lease pendens against Karen's rental property. This is basically a legal notice warning potential buyers or creditors that the property is subject to a lawsuit. Karen couldn't sell, refinance, or flee without settling our claims first. Phase 4, public exposure. The plan was to coordinate maximum legal impact with maximum public embarrassment. Instead of just shutting down the resort quietly, we would wait for Karen's biggest event, the grand opening celebration she'd been advertising, and spring the trap in front of witnesses, media, and law enforcement. Mrs. Chen explained the beauty of our approach while sorting through decades of financial fraud evidence. Karen thinks she's playing checkers, but we're playing chess. Every move she makes gives us more ammunition. The DIY surveillance setup was surprisingly simple. We installed professional trail cameras with night vision around the property perimeter, each one disguised as birdhouses or tree equipment. A simple spreadsheet tracked every guest visit, payment amount, and activity. I recorded every conversation with Karen using a phone app, perfectly legal in our single consent state. But the emotional preparation was harder than the legal strategy. I spent hours in Grandpa's cabin reading through his old letters about building this place with honest sweat and a clear conscience. I found his Purple Heart medal wrapped in tissue paper along with a letter from his commanding officer praising his unwavering integrity under fire. "Grandpa," I said out loud to the empty cabin, surrounded by the smell of old leather from his tackle box and the feel of smooth river rocks he'd collected for the foundation, "I promise I'll protect what you built, and I'll do it the right way." The transformation from victim to strategic fighter felt like putting on armor. For months, I'd been reacting to Karen's attacks, always one step behind, always playing defense. Now I had a team, a plan, and most importantly, the patience to let Karen destroy herself. Sarah summed it up perfectly during our final strategy meeting. "Mike, the beautiful thing about fighting fraudsters is that they always think they are smarter than everyone else. Karen's going to keep escalating because she can't help herself. All we have to do is document her crimes and wait for the perfect moment to present the evidence." Marcus added, "From a legal perspective, timing is everything. We could shut her down tomorrow, but the charges would be smaller. If we wait for her grand opening celebration, we get maximum criminal exposure, maximum civil damages, and maximum public impact." The sound of pages turning in legal statute books became my lullaby as we finalized every detail. Karen thought she was building a resort empire on my stolen land. What she was actually building was the evidence that would destroy her. Karen's desperation started showing in ways that would have been funny if they weren't so malicious. First, my boat engine mysteriously failed during what should have been a peaceful Saturday morning fishing trip. The mechanic found sugar in the gas tank, a classic sabotage that could have caused serious damage if the engine had seized while I was on the water. Thanks to Rita's surveillance cameras, we had crystal clear footage of Karen's husband, Robert, sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m. with a bag of Domino sugar. The infrared cameras even caught him struggling to figure out which cap was the gas tank. Apparently, city councilmen don't know much about boat maintenance. Next, someone started vandalizing my security cameras, spray painting the lenses or redirecting them toward trees. Again, our hidden backup cameras caught the culprit. Karen herself, wearing black yoga pants and a dark hoodie like some kind of suburban ninja, was crawling through bushes at midnight trying to blind my surveillance system. The woman who measured grass with rulers was risking everything to sabotage evidence. Then came the bureaucratic harassment campaign. Anonymous complaints flooded the city about my unsafe septic system, unpermitted electrical work, and abandoned vehicles. Every few days, a different inspector would show up with yet another bogus violation report. Most of these inspectors were decent people just doing their jobs, but a couple seemed suspiciously eager to find problems. One spent 3 hours trying to declare my grandfather's hand-built stone fireplace a fire hazard before admitting he couldn't find any actual code violations. But the digital attacks revealed Karen's true colors. Fake reviews appeared overnight on every platform: Google, Yelp, TripAdvisor, even Facebook. According to these reviews, I was a dangerous property owner who threatened innocent tourists, a mentally unstable individual who shouldn't be allowed near families. Rita's tech investigation traced every single fake review back to the same IP address, Karen's home internet connection. She was so confident in her tech skills that she didn't even bother using a VPN or separate computers. Then Karen's husband made their biggest mistake yet. Robert showed up at my cabin one evening with what he called a business proposal. Picture this: a city councilman in a golf cart, wearing a white polo shirt and khakis, trying to look like some kind of diplomatic negotiator. "Mike," he said, "we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Karen's built something special here, and would like to offer you a partnership, a 50-50th split of all resort profits, full recognition of your property rights, and we handle all the business operations." When I asked to see actual financial records, he started talking about proprietary information and competitive advantages. When I refused his offer, his tone changed completely. "Look, buddy," Robert said, dropping the friendly councilman act, "you can do this the easy way or the hard way. We've got city council connections, and we can make your life very difficult. Eminent domain seizure for the public good isn't off the table." The mini twist that made my blood boil was when he started hinting at my mental health issues and concerning behavior patterns, trying to frame me as unstable and unfit to manage my own property. Apparently, Karen had been building a case that I was unstable and possibly dangerous, planning to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. "We've got statements from neighbors about your erratic behavior," Robert continued, "and documentation of threats against resort guests. It would be a shame if that information found its way to the wrong people." But here's what Robert didn't know: I was recording every word with a phone app Sarah had recommended. His threats, his bribery attempts, his hints about using city connections to steal my property, all captured in high-definition audio. My counterpunch was subtle but devastating. I started working with Detective Rita to build relationships with honest city employees who were disgusted by the corruption. We found a building inspector named Dave who'd been pressured to fabricate violations and was ready to blow the whistle on the whole operation. Meanwhile, Linda, the forensic accountant, discovered that Karen's resort income was being funneled through 3 different shell companies to hide it from creditors and tax authorities. Every guest payment was creating a paper trail of tax evasion and money laundering. But the most satisfying development was watching Karen's overconfidence destroy her. Resort bookings were increasing. She'd been featured in a regional tourism magazine, and she was already announcing expansion plans for a spa, a wedding venue, and a corporate retreat center. In interviews, she claimed to be an environmental entrepreneur and a pioneer in sustainable tourism. She even applied for a $50,000 state tourism development grant using falsified ownership documents and fake environmental impact studies. Every lie created more evidence. Every false claim dug the hole deeper. Every public statement gave us more ammunition for the criminal case quietly building behind the scenes. The taste of anticipation was almost overwhelming as we watched Karen's empire expand on stolen land, knowing that every dollar of profit would eventually be seized as evidence. Karen's final desperate measure started with a social media blitz that would have impressed a political campaign manager. She launched a coordinated attack across Facebook, Instagram, and Nextdoor, painting me as a dangerous individual harassing a successful female entrepreneur. The posts were masterfully crafted to trigger maximum outrage. Local man threatens resort guests. Property owner makes terrorist threats. And my personal favorite, unstable individual needs psychiatric intervention before someone gets hurt. Each post included carefully edited photos and videos designed to make me look threatening, furthering her false narrative while leaving an even larger trail of lies for us to expose. But Karen's biggest mistake was recruiting her neighbors for a support rally. She organized what she called a community safety meeting in the HOA clubhouse, complete with a petition demanding my immediate removal from the neighborhood for public safety. About 30 people showed up, mostly folks who'd never met me, but were terrified by Karen's propaganda campaign. She convinced them I was some kind of unhinged property owner who posed a threat to their families and property values. The mini twist that almost made me laugh came when Karen contacted Channel 7 News with her sob story about being a small business owner bullied by an angry male landowner. She provided them with selectively edited footage that made every interaction look like harassment. The news segment aired on Thursday evening. Local resort owner claims harassment by property dispute. Karen played the victim perfectly, dabbing her eyes while explaining how she'd invested everything in creating a sustainable ecotourism business, only to face constant threats and intimidation. But what Karen didn't know was that Sarah had already contacted the same reporter with our complete evidence file. The follow-up investigation was going to be very different from what Karen expected. Meanwhile, Robert was working his city council connections overtime. Anonymous police reports appeared, claiming I'd made credible threats against city officials. My employer received calls questioning my mental stability and my fitness for electrical work around families. The psychological warfare escalated when Karen tried to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. She filed paperwork claiming I'd threatened violence, exhibited paranoid delusions about property ownership, and posed a clear and present danger to resort guests. The scariest part was how close she came to succeeding. A mental health warrant requires surprisingly little evidence, and Karen had compiled months of out-of-context interactions, edited recordings, and neighbor statements about my supposed concerning behavior. But my counterpunch was already in motion. Detective Rita had connected me with a state investigator named Agent Martinez, who specialized in organized fraud cases. Every piece of evidence we collected, the financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and falsified documents, had been carefully organized into what prosecutors call a slam-dunk case. Agent Martinez explained that Karen's operation was part of a larger pattern they'd been tracking across multiple counties. She'd hit at least 6 other property owners with similar scams, Agent Martinez said. But I was the first one who had fought back systematically. Federal involvement came when Linda discovered that Karen had been using interstate banking to launder resort profits. Moving money across state lines to avoid taxes and creditors made this a federal crime, which meant FBI oversight and far more serious penalties. But the most satisfying development was watching Karen's media manipulation backfire spectacularly. The Channel 7 investigative team had done their homework, and the follow-up story was going to destroy her credibility completely. "We've got everything," Sarah told me during our final preparation meeting. "Financial fraud, tax evasion, property theft, defamation, extortion, money laundering, and conspiracy. Karen's looking at federal prison time, not just civil penalties." The emotional weight of months of harassment finally started lifting as I realized Karen's desperate escalation had sealed her fate. Every lie she told created more evidence. Every false report dug the hole deeper. Every media appearance gave prosecutors more ammunition. The irony was almost poetic. Karen's attempt to destroy my reputation had created a perfect paper trail of her own criminal behavior. Her social media posts, police reports, and news interviews would be exhibits in her own prosecution. The smell of freshly cut grass from my neighbor's lawns reminded me that life would eventually return to normal. The sound of Karen's voice on the evening news, confident, entitled, completely unaware of the trap closing around her, would soon be replaced by something far more satisfying. 3 days before Karen's grand opening celebration, Agent Martinez gave me the news I'd been waiting for. "We're ready to move. Federal warrants signed. State charges filed. Asset seizure orders prepared. All we need is the perfect moment." Karen thought she was about to celebrate her greatest triumph. What she was actually planning was her own public destruction. The grand opening of Sunset Shores Resort was everything Karen had dreamed of and more. She'd invited the mayor, 3 city council members, the Chamber of Commerce president, and about 50 local business leaders for what she called a celebration of innovative ecotourism. Professional photographers captured every moment as Karen, wearing a crisp white blazer and her biggest fake smile, prepared to cut the ceremonial ribbon stretched across my grandfather's dock. The local news crew was positioned perfectly to broadcast her moment of triumph across the entire region. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen announced to the gathered crowd, "welcome to the future of sustainable tourism in our beautiful community. Sunset Shores represents the perfect harmony between environmental stewardship and economic opportunity." The smell of catered hors d'oeuvres mixed with expensive champagne, while guests in business suits mingled around property that had been stolen from my family. The sound of polite applause and networking chatter filled the air where Grandpa's fishing boat had once drifted quietly in the morning mist. That's when I made my entrance. I walked down the gravel driveway with my legal team, Sarah, Marcus, and Detective Rita, followed by Agent Martinez and 2 other federal investigators. Behind them came Sheriff's Deputy Johnson with arrest warrants, and behind him, a forensic accounting team with asset seizure orders. The Channel 7 News crew immediately turned their cameras toward our group, sensing that something far more interesting than a ribbon cutting was about to happen. Karen saw us coming, and her confident smile faltered for just a moment before she regained her composure. "Folks," she said loudly, "please don't be concerned by this disruption. This is the property owner I mentioned, and he's been struggling with some personal issues." I walked straight up to the microphone, and the crowd went silent. You could hear the gentle lapping of water against the dock and the nervous shuffling of expensive shoes on imported gravel. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the water, "thank you for coming to my property today. I'm Mike Thompson, and this land has been in my family for 60 years. I pulled out my property deed and held it up for everyone to see. You are all currently trespassing on private property, attending the grand opening of a completely illegal business operation." The mic drop moment came when I gestured toward Karen, who was standing frozen beside her ceremonial ribbon. "This woman, Karen Whitmore, has been operating a fraudulent resort business on my stolen land for the past 6 months. She has no permits, no licenses, no insurance, and absolutely no legal right to be here." The crowd's murmurs turned to shocked silence as Agent Martinez stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit theft of services." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the lake as Karen's white blazer was replaced with silver bracelets. Her face went from confident pink to terrified pale in about 3 seconds. But the real fireworks started when Marcus announced the civil penalties. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "under state triple damages laws, Mrs. Whitmore owes Mr. Thompson 3 times every dollar she earned from this illegal operation. Based on our investigation, that's approximately $400,000 in restitution, plus attorney fees and punitive damages." Mayor Davidson immediately started distancing himself from the scandal. "I want to be clear that the city had no knowledge of these alleged improprieties," he announced, backing away from Karen like she had a contagious disease. The resort guests who'd paid for weekend packages demanded immediate refunds, while the business leaders who'd come to network suddenly found urgent reasons to leave. Within 20 minutes, the grand opening celebration had turned into a full-blown crime scene, complete with yellow tape and evidence markers. But my favorite moment came when Robert Whitmore tried to flee in his golf cart, only to find Deputy Johnson waiting by the clubhouse with a separate warrant for conspiracy and bribery charges. Watching a city councilman get arrested in a golf cart while wearing khakis and a polo shirt was worth every month of harassment. The Channel 7 reporter, who'd originally come to cover a feel-good business story, found herself with the exclusive scoop on the biggest fraud case in county history. "This is unprecedented," she told the camera. "What was supposed to be a celebration has turned into a federal criminal investigation." As the crowd dispersed and the evidence team began photographing every fake permit and forged document, I finally had a moment of peace. The sunset over my grandfather's lake looked exactly the way it had when I was 12, fishing with Grandpa Joe and learning about integrity, hard work, and standing up to bullies. The taste of justice was sweeter than any champagne Karen could have served. 6 months later, justice had been served with a side of poetic irony. Karen received 18 months in federal prison, 3 years probation, and a $300,000 restitution order that would follow her for the rest of her life. Robert lost his city council position and faced ethics violations that ended his political career permanently. But the real satisfaction came from watching the domino effect of their downfall. The state investigation uncovered Karen's fake HOA presidency scam, and 47 neighbors recovered thousands in illegally collected fees. Mrs. Chen was elected as the new HOA president and immediately implemented the financial transparency measures that Karen had spent years avoiding. The first month after reclaiming my property, I took time off work to restore everything to Grandpa Joe's original vision. Every piece of Karen's resort infrastructure was removed: the commercial dock, industrial lighting, imported landscaping, all of it gone. In its place, I replanted native wildflowers and oak saplings that would grow for generations. Rebuilding Grandpa's dock using his original design became a meditation on family legacy and honest work. The feel of weathered wood and the smell of lake water reminded me why this place was worth fighting for. I even found his original tackle box buried under Karen's fake gazebo, still containing hand-tied flies from the 1960s. But the most meaningful transformation came from turning personal justice into community benefit. I established the Grandfather's Lake Veterans Retreat, free weekend getaways for military families dealing with deployment stress, PTSD recovery, and readjustment challenges. Partnering with the local VFW and American Legion, we host about 20 families per month during the warmer seasons. The Scholarship Fund honoring Grandpa Joe's Purple Heart provides college assistance for children of deployed service members. Funded entirely by the restitution payments from Karen's criminal case, it has already helped 12 kids pursue education instead of debt. We also created controlled public access for environmental education and fishing programs. Local schools bring students for water quality testing and wildlife observation, teaching kids about conservation and stewardship. The irony is perfect. Karen wanted to exploit this land for profit, but now it serves the community for free. The financial outcome exceeded everyone's expectations. When Karen's resort assets were auctioned off, the proceeds funded property improvements and program expansion. Legitimate ecotourism inquiries now go through proper channels, permitted day trips for fishing guides and nature photographers who respect the land and follow the rules. Fighting Karen's fraud awakened a passion for helping others combat institutional bullying and property theft. I now volunteer with the State Attorney General's office, helping other property owners document similar scams and navigate the legal system. The practical takeaways from this experience could fill a book, but here are the essentials. Verify claims about your property through official records, not just someone's word. Document everything: photos, videos, recordings, financial records, when dealing with potential fraud. Contact state agencies early when local authorities won't help. Federal investigators take this stuff seriously. Know your rights regarding trespassing and property use, because bullies count on your ignorance. Last weekend, I sat on Grandpa's restored dock at sunset, listening to loons call across the peaceful water. His fishing rod is propped against the cabin wall where he left it, and his Purple Heart medal sits in a place of honor on the mantle. The legacy he built with honest sweat and a clean conscience is stronger than ever. Karen thought she could steal 60 years of family history and turn it into her personal ATM. Instead, she helped me discover that Grandpa's most important lesson wasn't about fishing or property ownership, it was about protecting what matters and serving something bigger than yourself. Next week, I'll tell you about the city councilman who tried to steal my neighbor's house through fake tax liens, and how he used his own corruption against him to expose a multi-million-dollar property theft ring. Drop a comment with your worst HOA horror story. I read every single one and might feature yours in a future video. If this story helped you understand your property rights, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell.